Marie de France was born in Bretagne during the medieval era. It's worth noting that Bretagne was, and still is, one of the most distinct regions of France, and that during the medieval era, it was particularly hard for women to be authors. Her writings are full of mythical events that in many ways relate back to the place where she grew up, and makes the reader feel a strong connection to Bretagne through her vivid tales of fantasy. Her stories also emphasize the importance of honesty and loyalty in many ways, but it particularly relates back to love. If anything, Marie de France reminds us to treat everyone with honesty, the inherent duty we have to commemorate the special things about the place we came from, and to follow our dreams, even if it means breaking some of the notions of the era. Arthur Rimbaud is one of the most important poets of all time. For me, he marks the transition between the rigidness of classical poetry and the experimentation and liberty of modern poetry. His works reflect a maturity that went in line with his personal story, and by the end of his career, Rimbaud wrote one of the best poems of all time, Le Bateau Ivre, without even reaching the age of 20. His innovation, his experimentation, his boldness, and his focus on inner emotions remind us that we have a responsibility with ourselves before anything else, that we should believe in ourselves without considering our ages, and that sometimes we have the duty to innovate, not for the sake of quality, but for the sake of finding more genuine ways to express the complex feelings that lie within ourselves. Apollinaire was above all an artist. His contributions to poetry might seem small and very specific, but his ideals have defined the way in which poetry is written today. He wasn't much of following the rules and experimented a lot in his verses, which pictured the magic and intense emotions of rather mundane scenarios. The beauty isn't on big bombastic events, but in the small details that make a story feel alive. His writings reveal that there's magic in what it seems to be just normal life, and through his writings we can get the sense of responsibility of enjoying the little details. Jean Racine was a classicist. His plays are about Greek, Roman, and other classical stories. He has a very structured rhyme scheme, and he's very rigid in some ways. But the greatness of his plays lies within the emotion, the tragedy, and the suffering that feels very real and humane. Racine wasn't afraid of telling stories about hopeless ideas and lost causes. His characters might seem one-dimensional at first, but the level of emotion that these characters have is very, very intense. Racine reminds us to be aware of our passions and how choices have consequences, because no tragedy is ever written without the actors, and we are the actors. Samuel Beckett might just be the opposite to Racine. Beckett pushed many of the traditional lines of what defines theater, and it shows. Waiting for Godot is a 2.5-hour play about two guys waiting, doing what most people and theater experts alike will call stupid things, but through these very elements, Beckett talks about life in a very unique way. His plays are very cynical, vague, and even confusing to some extent, but this is done to reflect the aspects of life with honesty and not to the misleading structure of a traditional play. The essence of Beckett is to admit that life can be done sometimes, and that's not a bad thing at all, and we shouldn't be scared of admitting the dumbness of life. Voltaire is very funny. Candide can be considered a tragedy, but in many ways it seems more like a parody. Voltaire's goal is to make the reader think about the state of society, not by stating the facts, but by making fun of them, making us realize the foolish nature of many concepts that we take for granted, like honor, church structure, and even the sense of thinking about life. Voltaire isn't much for idealisms, and it's clear in his novel that his main concern is with people, not vague ideals. If anything, Voltaire teaches the importance of being a critic to society, even if it's by making jokes, because nothing is as simple and perfect as it seems. Albert Camus was born in French-controlled Algeria, and well, he's my favorite philosopher in general. His masterpiece, L'Étranger, is one of those books in which I can find new things every time I read it. It's not an enjoyable book at all, but it's rich in content. It's a story about racism, about murder, about love, about empathy, about the human condition in the modern era, about colonialism, about what it means to have a good life, about the criminal system, but above all, I think it's a story about loneliness. To the story of the apathic Merceau, Camus wants us to feel the duty we have with life itself, the many wonderful aspects that make life worth living even during the hardest times: friendship, nature, family, and the other small details in between. I don't think we should look at Merceau as well, the outsider, but rather as a cruelly honest reflection of ourselves during the times of apathy, a reflection upon which we can learn about how we take things for granted and how we should try to enjoy our best life.